All right, with all of our discussants here, I think I will start. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Elena Jones, and I am with the Seminary Co-op Bookstores. Our stores were founded in 1961, and in 2019, they became the first not-for-profit bookstores whose mission is bookselling. That mission recognizes bookstores as fundamental civic institutions, and it allows us to work with like-minded partners on events like these. Tonight, we're delighted to be partnering with BookPost. Take advantage of our partnership with BookPost by spending $100 or more in our stores or online. Send your receipts to our friends at BookPost, and you'll receive a free 3-month subscription to their Substack, which is full of author interviews, book reviews, and other literary treasures. We'll share a link in the chat so you can learn more about our partnership. Let me now introduce our presenters. Donna Seaman is the editor for adult books at Booklist and a member of the content leadership team for the American Writers Museum. She is a recipient of the Louis Shore Award for Excellence in Book Reviewing, the James Friend Memorial Award for Literary Criticism, and the Studs Terkel Humanities Service Award. Seaman has written for the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, and other publications. She's the author of Identity Unknown: Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists. Laurie Herzl is a senior editor at the Star Tribune. Previously, she was a writer and editor at Minnesota Monthly Magazine and at the Duluth News Tribune. Herzl grew up in Duluth, earned an MFA from Queen's University in Charlotte, North Carolina, and has written 2 books and is the former president of the National Book Critics Circle Board. Ann Kjellberg is the founding editor of BookPost, a newsletter-based book review delivery service. She was on the editorial staff of the New York Review of Books from 1988 to 2017. In 2009, she founded the literary magazine Little Star. On top of all that, she is the literary executor of poet Joseph Brodsky's estate. We're so happy to have you all with us this evening. One final note about format before we begin. There'll be time for audience questions at the end of the program, so please make use of the chat function, which you will find in the lower part of your screen, to submit questions. We may go a little off script and answer questions as they pop up, so submit them whenever they pop into your own head. So with that, I turn things over to our guests.
Thank you so much, Elena. I just wanted to start off with 2 little prefatory notes, which is that I am so honored to have this partnership this season with Seminary Co-op. And I think that the advocacy they're doing for book selling as a form of community engagement with reading and a way of educating people about the importance of sustaining book selling is so important. I encourage all of you to patronize Seminary Co-op and also to kind of learn about what the really original and pioneering work they're doing. I wrote about it in BookPost, and there's also some great stuff about it online on their site. And also, I just want to announce that we have just locked in the date for another BookPost event at Seminary Co-op on December 9th, also at 6 p.m. I will be speaking with Paget Powell, who has reviewed an erstwhile novelist who's reviewed a little bit, somewhat reluctant book reviewer for BookPost, and has just published a book of essays. I refer you to his quite hilarious piece about ambivalence about being a proclaimer of literary merit that he published in BookPost right after his book was sent to press, called memorably F the Classics. So I thought we would just start out, just to get a sense of the lay of the land. I'd ask each of our guests to describe for everybody sort of what is under your purview. How many reviews do you publish a week? You know, how long are they? What's their audience? Are you working with a big pool of reviewers? Maybe you can each tell us a little bit about your work, starting with Laurie.
Thank you so much, Anne. Yes, I am the senior editor for books at the Minneapolis Star Tribune. So we write book reviews for a general newspaper audience. Given that, I do try to have a wide variety of books every week on our books pages. We review poetry, fiction, short stories, memoir, history, general nonfiction, children's books. We try to have something for everyone every week, but over time, I think, you know, it evens out pretty well. I have 2 full pages in the Sunday paper, so we review about 5 books, sometimes 6. and I write a weekly column as well. And then we also have 2 short kind of mini reviews that run on Mondays. And then on the Tuesday features cover, I run a review, which because my budget has been trimmed a little bit, that is now Wire, but that's also, you know, it's also great to get other voices in that way as well. I write some of the reviews myself. Some of the staff writers at the paper write reviews, but mainly I rely on a pretty large and diverse pool of freelance critics. I would be lost without them. They are great. They are professional. They alert me to books that sometimes I'm not aware of. It's just really, to me, it's a real cooperative relationship, and I am so grateful to work with them. And I'm so grateful that the Star Tribune, in my 14 years in this job, has never cut my space and has really mostly left my budget alone so that I can continue to do this work.
Thank you. I'm just going to underline what I think is a really important point about having Laurie here, which is that when I began in publishing, daily book reviews in daily papers were pervasive. That was how people found out about books. And now local newspapers are barely struggling along, and there's an intense pressure to publish for clicks. So there's very, very little daily reviewing in the national news diet. And so what Laurie's doing is really, really exceptional and wonderful. And then Donna, and I'm just going to do the on a similar front, speaking to librarians who are so much at the front line of presenting books to people and making books available kind of in the public square. Just a huge footprint of influence. Tell us about how you manage that.
Oh, thank you, Ann. Yes, Ann and I are laughing. Ann's visited Booklist in our old digs and seen how it works. So I'm an editor of Booklist, which is one of the pre-publication review magazines. You know, our sister publications are Library Journal and Kirkus and Publishers Weekly, which I will all mention are commercial ventures, whereas Booklist is part of the American Library Association, which is the membership organization for librarians and library workers. Our audience, our readers also include many booksellers and publishing people and writers and teachers and just general book people. Booklist has been around for well over a century, and we do very short reviews, the capsule reviews, the haiku of book reviewing, as I like to call them. And each issue of Booklist, and most months there's an issue every 2 weeks, covers as many books as we can manage. And as Laurie was saying, you know, we really try to cover everything from, I mean, we do like craft books and cookbooks and history and essays and poetry and books about art and science. And it's, you know, it's kind of the whole library in each issue of Booklist. And we have a large books for youth section, all ages from board books to YA novels. And we also review audiobooks as productions unto themselves, where we evaluate the audio aspects of them. I'm in charge of the section for adult books, which always sounds hilarious, but that's what they used to say in the library world, adult books. And I have two small staff of editors, but wonderful editors. And as Laurie was saying too, we have, you know, enormous number of freelance reviewers all across the country and even in around the world. And they have subject areas or genre specialties. And it's quite the, you know, we work on high volume. So I'm editing, you know, anywhere from 60 to 70 reviews every 2 weeks and assigning books all the time. And, you know, it's sort of a bit of a book madhouse going on. But, and we also do a lot of features. So we, our mission is to make sure that before books come out or as they're coming out, that libraries and booksellers know about them, know what we're excited about. We have the coveted starred reviews, which are a little longer. And these are books we, you know, say are outstanding. And then we have a lot of features where we, you know, we're always kind of creating constellations around books. So if there's a historical novel about, you know, Sylvia Beach or something, then we might have a list of books about other biographical historical novels about literary women. So that's part of our mission too.
Thank you. Well, as Elena told you, I worked for many, many years at the New York Review of Books, where we published bi-weekly a great big book review with very long reviews, 3,500 to 4,000 words usually, and mostly written not so much by freelancers, but by people who were distinguished in the various fields. So we were mostly reaching out to people who had academic expertise and also novelists and book critics, but people who specialized in a kind of different scale of writing. About 3 years ago, I left the New York Review, and part of what I really wanted to do was to try to develop a way to bring book reviewing into the media diet of a faster world, to try to help people read about books in an interesting way who are not able to read a large book review of 3,500 word reviews every couple of weeks, but who wanted to have an experience of real literary flavor. So I have a Substack. I was a beta Substack. I was one of the first Substack newsletters. So I send to people one book review written by someone else every week. And so those go to my paying subscribers, and then to people who just sign up. I have other kind of commentary about books, reflections about books by writers, and some stuff about me, by me about the industry. But for me, the jewel in the crown is the reviews, and that's what I really care about. And it seems to take me a lot of time just to edit this very tiny number of reviews. So even for Donna, who is publishing these thousands of reviews, has to be selective. And the question we always get asked is how we pick. So maybe Laurie, do you want to kick off with some reflections on that impossible subject?
It's so hard. It is so hard. And what I tell people is it's an art, not a science. For me, I have the luxury of not having to review everything, unlike Donna, and unlike, the Washington Post and the New York Times. They really have to be on top of all of the big books. And for me, if I only have 5 books on a Sunday, I'm looking for a mix. So, yes, we'll review some of the big books, Amor Towles or, Louise Erdrich, obviously, she lives here. But I'm also looking for smaller books that might get not as much attention, university presses, some small literary presses. So I'm looking for a mix every week. And before COVID, my method was a little different than it is now because I'm working from home. But what I would do is I have a book room at the paper, and it's a locked room with no windows. And it's bookshelves all the way around on all of the walls. And every day I would go through the day's mail, and there was usually 100 or more books in the mail, and go through them and just kind of set them aside if they looked like maybe it's a local writer, maybe it's a writer who's coming to town, maybe it's a book that maybe it's a big book, maybe it's a small book that looks interesting and quirky. I mean, it's just what really strikes me. And I set those aside. The other ones I shelve on the shelves by pub month so that I can find them later if I need them. And then I bring them up to my desk and I start going through them and thinking about which critics might be good for which books, and looking at my budget to see, what holes I have to fill. I mean, it's really, it's just a matter of looking at the books, handling them, reading the jacket copy. I read all of the jacket copy, and seeing what kind of strikes me as interesting books that I think that the readers of my newspaper would be interested in reading, which is kind of an arrogant thing to do, really. I mean, but I have to do it. It's what my job is, to curate. So, sometimes I assign books and I regret them, and sometimes I miss books and wish, why didn't I review this one? But it's, 5 books a week. It's really, it's winnowing. It's just winnowing, really.
How does it work for you, Donna?
Yes. Oh, I'm haunted by the books we don't review. Even at our volume, we're still very restricted. My page budgets are very tight. And back when we were in the office, we'd get, some days we'd have 200 books coming in, and we look at all of them. Now we have to do it electronically. Excuse me. So yeah, I see in the chat, someone says, how has your process changed? I'll tell you, it has become, I call them the invisible books. You know, I used to have a large office of Booklist, acres of shelves, and all the print galleys would come in, the ARCs, and I could organize them. So I had my nonfiction shelves, my fiction shelves, poetry, all that. And, you know, it was sort of like standing in this room, and I could just look around and figure out, you know, this is for this reviewer, this is for this issue. It was very hands-on, very tactile. Since we've been, you know, sort of sent home, which has many advantages, I don't really see very many books anymore. So it's become a matter of spreadsheets. So books are submitted as PDFs or some kind of electric files, and we have a system for uploading those. But for assigning, I just have to look up every title. It's become very laborious. I miss, you know, sitting in front of a cart of freshly opened mail and looking at all the galleys, because you get so much information from print galleys. It remains to be seen what's going to happen in the future. But for now, I have to just sit in front of a screen and look up every single book, read about it, and think then about, first, are we going to review it? And we have certain criteria at Booklist. I mean, it's very broad criteria, but we don't do any academic or scholarly books. It has to be trade books. It has to have a sort of public appeal. I look at all the big publisher titles, of course, but we definitely watch for small and indie presses, very much so. I'm excited when I see new presses start up. I personally love short story collections and poetry collections and essay collections, the things that are not very commercial. But we also have a huge crime fiction section because, you know, this is people read. Romance novels are super popular. Our science fiction fantasy, which of the genres I think is probably percolating the most right now, although romance is evolving in very impressive ways. So you can tell I keep my eye on everything. I personally don't review much, if any, genre fiction. I also do write reviews. I'm very much in the literary fiction and essay and poetry and arts and history. But so within each of those genres or subject areas, I have to be selective, of course. Then when they're assigned, you know, Booklist has a policy where every book we review is recommended. It doesn't mean that the book isn't flawed, perhaps, that we don't have mixed reviews, but we have to feel that it's worth a library's budget or a bookseller's attention. So even when we send out books, that we don't get reviews for all of them. Our reviewers do try to be very, you know, keep the high standards. So, but we just sort of, as much as the volume as we do, there are books we just can't get to. And that's the hardest part of my job to face, I think. But the assigning, you know, it's always challenging, but it's kind of fun. And I will say the one positive aspect of the electronic regime is that you get that book to a reviewer in a second. I mean, when you hit send, it's there. And that part I really do enjoy.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, maybe it's worth sending out a little flag to publishers that it's much harder for us now to find things serendipitously.
Yes.
You know, the process has become much more deliberate, and we are reading all of this kind of promotional text all the time instead of flipping around in the books. And it's also, I have many writers who won't work from an electronic copy, so it makes it harder to have the kind of advanced planning that we used to have, but that's a logistical issue. For me, I think the thing that I would kind of overwhelmingly, and we'll return, we were talking before about negative reviews and the policy of negative reviews. I'll come back to Laurie about that too in a minute, but I think a misconception that I encounter among writers especially, and also sometimes among publishers, is that they sort of feel like reviewers are working for them. And I would say that as a book review editor, I am working for my reader. I'm producing a thing for the readers of Book Post. And the overwhelming demand is to create a thing that has the right shape, you know, that it has these different flavors, that it's kind of spicy and sweet, it has some dessert, it has some vegetables, it has some protein. I think that unlike the review, my focus in Book Post a little more is on informing people, like I'm trying to contribute to a sense of learnedness or people's excitement about learning about things. So I try to touch on different subjects that seem important. So it means that I don't have the opportunity. It's not as though it's this meritocracy where we just pick the best of everything. Even if we could figure out what that is, which we can't. We're kind of creating a little world that has its own shape and its own balance, and just inevitably huge swaths are left behind. I mean, there was much more book reviewing done on the whole, I think, so writers received a lot more of the sort of the promotional benefits of being reviewed in the past, and also just the emotional benefits of being read and having a chance to be understood. And I think it's a hard part about our job that we don't have that opportunity really to give people more, to give writers more attention. Yeah, so Donna, you said you kind of don't do negative reviews so much because you're a recommending engine. Laurie, what's the negative the negative review policy at the Star Tribune?
Well, we don't have a firm policy other than if it is a book by a debut writer, a writer that is obscure and just starting out, and the book is going to get a mostly negative review, then I ask the critics to tell me that before they write the review. And usually I will not run a review. I'll pay the critic a kill fee for their time. But it seems to me to be a really cruel thing when I only have 5 slots, and you know, to pick a book that no one's ever heard of by a writer no one's ever heard of and say this book is terrible doesn't feel to me like it's serving anyone. Certainly not the writer, who would probably be devastated, but it doesn't really serve our readers either, because if it's a book that is fairly obscure and new, you know, chances are they wouldn't encounter it anyway. We do run negative reviews of books by writers who, as I like to say, you know, can take it. You know, we have given Stephen King some pretty brutal reviews on Paul Thoreau. I mean, and then I think it's our responsibility, because those are well-known people, and those are books that our readers would probably be looking for or aware of, or, you know, hey, a new Stephen King is out. And it feels like it's our duty to tell them, you might want to pass on this one and wait for his next one. Or I don't mean to pick on him, because, you know, obviously he's a genius, but he can take it. So, but mainly my theory is similar to Donna's, in that since I have so few slots, I do prefer the reviews to be recommendations. You know, so that when the reader opens up the Star Tribune and sees 2 pages of reviews, what they will see are, here's 5 books that, you know, you might be interested in reading. And that's kind of how I go into the assigning and the choosing. But again, you know, I try to make it clear to the critics that I work with that while I don't want a negative review of a debut book, I don't want a positive review of a bad book. In other words, I am not soliciting positive reviews. I'm soliciting honest reviews, you know, and if it's mainly negative, then we're going to have to talk about whether or not it's worth doing this. So, you know, it gets complicated. I run a lot of mixed reviews, and I think that is perfectly fine. I mean, I think that is what it's all about, right? I mean, every book that we review is not going to be, you know, the greatest thing, but what I ask of the critics that I work with is try to figure out what it is the writer was doing with this book and try to assess if they were successful at it. And so sometimes, you know, we run very positive reviews of books that the critic actually personally didn't much like, but, you know, but that's not what the book was all about, right? So, you know, it gets tricky. It gets very tricky, but, you know, by and large, we run mainly positive or mixed reviews, but, you know, the negative ones, they pop up now and then. But like you had said also, and we aren't doing these reviews for the publicists. We're not doing these reviews for bookstores. We're not doing them for the authors. We're doing them for the readers of the paper. And that is something that I think is really important to keep in mind, because, the publicists that I work with, they're great. And they do not, at least the ones that I work with and trust, they don't try to steer me toward, lousy books by telling me that they're good. So I do trust them, but I can't always do what they like. That's not my job.
So we wanted next to talk a little bit about how we find our writers and how we choose them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe since Laurie just talked to us, Donna first.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, and I just want to say, I agree with Laurie on all points that we call them high demand books and book list, and we run lists every month of the big commercial books, and I don't review every one of those titles. Sometimes we don't get them in time anyway, but also I'm like, well, I've reminded people that, such and such is 50th book and whatever the series is coming out. So maybe we skip it and I give space to a first novel. And sometimes when we do review those kind of big books, they're plenty critical. They might say in a review, this is not the strongest in this series. People love this writer and they may be interested, but so yeah, there's lots of ways, even within recommendations, that you are honest, that you evaluate the book, whatever the hype around it may be. In terms of finding reviewers, that is, an ongoing challenge, and we really run quite a range of people. We hear from people a lot that want to review, of course, because we're associated with American Library Association. Many of our reviewers are not librarians, but we have many wonderful librarian reviewers who do reach out to us, and we've tried to organize this, and we've succeeded to a degree in the last couple of years. I'm often looking for certain subject areas because we cover so much, and I really want people who know what they're writing about. I need people with a health background to evaluate books about health. I mean, I feel very much responsibility in recommending books, especially nonfiction books in certain areas. So I'm really looking for people like that. And I often speak to students and emerging writers about reviewing. It's a great way to start a writing life. It's a wonderful way to be involved in publishing and writing, to write reviews. So I tell people, if any interest you're interested in plants or cats or stars or whatever it is, be sure and mention that to book review editors, because it really helps with nonfiction and also historical fiction. If someone tells me they have a history background, but they love history, then I'm very happy to be able to work with them, both fiction and nonfiction. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a different background, different interests, as well as writing skills and clips, and an understanding of the critical, an ability to be analytical about what you're reading. And it's very interesting. I have some people that are excellent readers that really need a lot of help writing, and that those are writers I'll work with because I know they have something to say, and I'm happy to help them say it. I have other people that write well, but maybe don't say that much. It's a very interesting balance. As an editor, I just always find that very challenging. So we just sort of have an open call for reviewers, and I encourage anyone who's interested to contact me or other reviewers at Booklist. It's all on the website, because it really does. We have a vast legions of reviewers, and people drop in and off, so we're always looking for new voices.
Thank you. How about you, Laurie?
When I started in this job, the previous books editor had a pretty good stable of freelancers, and I still work with some of them. They're great, and they've been working for the Star Tribune for a long time, and know what it is that we're looking for and how to do it, accurately, on deadline. I mean, all of those things that are super important for a newspaper. I get queries, every week, more than one, because there are fewer places that hire freelance critics. And so I have really highly qualified people querying me all the time. And like Donna said, I'm always looking for new voices. I do try a lot of people out. I'm looking for diversity. I'm looking for I mean, and diversity of all kinds,
Yes.
geographic and age and gender and race and, and interest, So, so I do work with a lot of new critics, but they're not new to criticism. I don't have time in this job to teach someone how to write a review. And so I do work with people who have done reviewing before. I have reached out to people as well who I think would have something interesting to say about a book, especially local writers. I try to have a mix on the page of local writers and national. And as Donna said, I have a couple of critics who live overseas as well. So that the pages don't feel too regional. You don't want all the voices to be kind of coming from a similar place. But there are so many writers here in the Twin Cities. And so I have approached many actually and asked if they would be interested in doing occasional reviews. So I find some by, going out and asking. I find some because they come to me. I have some that have just been working with me for a long time. And it's really interesting. And as Donna said, people kind of, come in and out. And some of the critics that I worked with initially who I loved, have moved on to other things. And so I am often looking, but I wouldn't say it's open the way Donna says, because I do get a lot of queries. I'm looking for people who have either written books or have written a lot of reviews. I have some literature professors, and for nonfiction, it gets a little broader. I have some history professors who review for me, but I am not looking for, a real academic tone to the reviews. So it gets a little tricky matching up what I need with what people can do. But I think that the important thing is to keep it fresh and to keep new voices coming onto the pages, because you don't want, the same 6 people speaking to you every single Sunday from these pages.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have some very long time reviewers at Booklist who I adore and am so grateful to. And earlier we were saying you can't do this job without great reviewers. So I feel it's wonderful to try to bring new people on. I also, just so grateful to the consistency. I have reviewers that will review this, they become a real expert in a certain area, or they review the same prolific author, until they get tired of her. But it's quite the community, and I feel really honored to be part of it. And it's a lot of work for a very little compensation. So I'm eternally grateful to everyone who brings their passion to this work.
Laurie, I think at some point when we were planning this, you mentioned the ethical concerns about how you choose reviewers kind of within a field. Do they know each other? Have they commented on each other's work?
Yes.
Before?
Yeah.
Maybe do you want to talk a little bit about that aspect?
Yeah. I hadn't been in this job too long before it became clear that this was could be a concern. And so I wrote up standards that I send to all of the critics who work for me, including staff writers at the paper. I ask everyone to read this because it just kind of goes into how we do it and what I'm looking for. And to me, the most important part of that is that you cannot review books written by people that you know personally. And the way that I phrase it in the reviewing guidelines is that you cannot review books written by friends or enemies, because either way, yeah, you could do some damage. And I have had long talks with critics about this too. It's like, what does it mean to know someone? One guy that reviews for me said, well, okay, I was on a panel with this person, 4 years ago. Can I review his book? And I really have to think about it. How public was the panel? Because with newspapers, you have to worry not only about conflict of interest, but you have to worry about the appearance of conflict of interest. And if everyone knows that you guys sat together on this panel and we're chatting back and forth, it feels too palsy, and I hate saying no, but because I'm sure you would do, a good, objective, honest job, but it might look like you're not. And so I have to worry about that. And the same with enemies, that's even trickier. But with social media, it gets even more complicated. I think I can never review a book myself written by Carolyn Levitt, because she is so friendly and she is so kind, and she's so gregarious, and she's so active on social media, and she's comments on my Facebook stuff all the time. And we both have curly hair, and so she writes, you know, about my hair. And you know, I've never met her. I have never met her, but she has been so nice to me on social media that I just think it would not be appropriate for me to review one of her books. And I see Ron Charles, the genius fiction critic at the Washington Post, he said this once on Twitter, and I have quoted him so many times that he doesn't know about, but he said to some writer, "You do not want to become my friend, because I can never write about your book." And I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell. So it's tough with poetry. And I mean, we have a huge poetry community in the Twin Cities, and well, in all of the state, actually, not just in the Twin Cities, and they all know each other. I mean, so it gets like, how do we review these books? I need somebody who understands, you know, this part of the country and understands what's going on here. But they can't know the poets. And so right now I have this wonderful critic. She just got her doctorate. She lives in Wisconsin. And I hope she never meets any of these poets, because I rely on her so much. But it is really tough.
Yeah, we have a whole section of guidelines about that for our reviewers. And, you know, I'm like, I mean, sometimes you meet writers professionally. I mean, I do at conferences, but it you know, I sort of like, if you don't have a meal with someone, you're okay. Like, you know, but I, you know, I definitely have a list of writers I don't feel I should review. And I've had writers, you know, I reach out to writers to ask them, you know, to do something for one of my many literary involvements. And I remember very clearly one novelist said to me, "I really don't want to get to know you because I value your review so much." I'm like, "No, I'm fine. I'm with you. This is not personal." So yeah, it's very interesting. And I find, you know, I'll just be frank about reviews I see in other places, the few places that do a lot of reviews. And I've come to call them to myself grudge matches, because I know that this reviewer has been given a writer that they are going to go after. And I, you know, it seems like deliberate, you know, some fireworks there. And I just think that's so negative and unnecessary. I mean, we're interested in books. And you know, I like to have critics review books more than always seeing authors reviewing each other. That's just a personal interest in mine, that I love reading, you know, well-known writers writing about books. It's wonderful, but it's also great to have people writing about books that are not in that category, that are critics or perhaps professors or something else, some other role in the world. I like a mix of that. So, and we managed to achieve. I mean, Booklist is very different than newspapers, but. So it's good to have other types of people doing it.
Oh, I can't believe we're nearly out of our.
Oh, like, my goodness!
Talking time.
You're right.
Let me just say a little bit. That, you know, in a way, I think working at the New York Review of Books was different in that it didn't. It was about bringing writers together from the world, and it wasn't so much speaking with an institutional voice and kind of rendering judgment. So the standards around people knowing each other were definitely looser. And it especially because in some fields, everybody knows, you know, it's sort of like poetry in Minnesota. And you find yourself getting to a person who, if they, you know, they're so remote, that they're not going to really be very well informed or, you know, kind of close to the issue. So maybe in that sort of a setting, it's possible to kind of experiment with some matchups that you might not be able to do in a more formal critical setting. I think what I learned, the style of editing that I learned at the review was the thing that my boss Bob always used to say approvingly when he came across a writer he wanted to use was, and it's such a simple little phrase, they're a good, clear writer. Clarity was what he absolutely wanted. And we were always often working with very complex academic ideas, and the idea was to try to convey them in language that people could understand, but also that a language that had some, you know, literary flavor and zest and argument. So I'm always looking for people, you know, there are a lot of writers out there who have very advanced critical faculties, but if they don't have the ability to convey a book, to convey a bunch of ideas quickly to people in a way that's tangible and immediate, then, you know, they've kind of lost people. So that's what I'm looking for. And what I really recommend to writers, to young writers who want to get into doing more long form book reviewing, is that I never use someone whose critical prose I haven't read. So, you know, even if you're like a brilliant person and you're, you know, an obvious genius, if I've never seen critical writing by you, I can't really have the confidence for that. So try as hard as you can to find places to publish the sort of essay you would like to write. And now with the internet, it's so much easier. You know, just do that all you can. And especially in fiction, authors get so bored by having to do plot summary, but it's really important to understand that unless you give the reader something to build on, to build your judgment on, the review sort of slips through their mind, or it slips through their fingers. You need to give them something that your judgment is about. So it's really important to find ways, not just to show how like fancy your argument is against this or that writer, but to convey the thing itself that you're about to criticize. That's my advice. I really, you know, you have to read a lot, and I was always very remorseful. I felt as though we could have more, everybody's short-staffed, nobody has any time, so you can't sit around reading blogs and literary magazines looking for new people. So it's really a challenge, but it's sort of the most important part, is to find new writers.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe just before we open it up for questioning, which it's time to do, I'll ask you all my last kind of sum me up sort of question, which is, I'll make it a kind of two-parter. What do you see as the challenges, the important challenges to books coverage? Like, what's keeping people from finding out about books, and, you know, how do you see your work as addressing that? And what would you do to make it better? Like, what do you think is missing from our the books coverage environment now, from the information that people get about books? So, Laurie, you want to take that on?
Well, I will say that my tenure in this job kind of was parallel with the rise of book blogs, which don't seem to be quite as popular as they were 10 years ago. And I remember feeling really excited about, you know, all these people were doing blogs, and I thought this meant that many, many, many different kinds of books were going to be written about in a public way. And at least the ones that I was looking in, they were all kind of the same books, you know, and they were all kind of the same authors, and they were all kind of the same big names. And I found that really disappointing. I think that and maybe there are more blogs and places that, like you said, I don't have time to be combing the web all the time looking for this stuff, but maybe there are other places where these books are being covered. But I do feel like they get kind of short shrift. And in my world, the world of newspapers, you know, I can't tell you how heartbreaking it is to see how newspapers are diminishing and books coverage is simply going away. You know, what the person who was the books editor at the Miami Herald now reviews for me, and the person who was a books editor in Dallas reviews for me, and I mean and a guy who was the books editor in Pittsburgh now often reviews for me. I mean, I feel like I'm the only one out there, and I know I'm not, but so I worry about that. I worry that books coverage is just going to go away. And I do think it's a problem. One thing that I have done in the last year is this, and you know, newspapers subscribe to wires. And so we get, you know, the New York Times, and we get the Washington Post wires, and we get McClatchy wire, and, you know, and it was part of our contract with freelancers that we did not put their reviews on the wire because they had the right to resell them. And the thing is, there's really nowhere for them to resell them. And so as I work with freelancers, I have been asking them, would it be okay with you if we put this out on the wire? And all but one of my critics so far has said, yes, that would be great. It gives the review more attention. It gets the book more attention. These reviews get gobbled up by smaller and regional papers that don't have book critics of their own. There's so few book reviews on the wire. I have to tell you, some weeks it's just us. And so if I can populate the wires with 5 book reviews and my column and maybe a profile that someone wrote of a writer and get those out there to other newspapers, it gets the word out a little bit more. And it's a small thing, but I see them, being published all over the place, and I think that it's a good thing.
Yes, definitely. I decry
That's
the
fantastic.
all right. Are we seizing up here?
Anne was
Yeah,
free.
I'm sorry.
Hello.
Carry on, Donna.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, so I too decry the decline of newspapers. I just think it's appalling in terms of news and culture. Really a tragic corporatization, sort of destruction of communities too. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm grateful for the newspaper coverage we still have. I mean, when I first started reviewing, it was a long time ago, there were many full Sunday book sections. The Chicago Tribune had one. I wrote for them, for Elizabeth Taylor, for many years. Now there's, the New York Times, basically, and they were able to, declare their 125th anniversary, excitement. And I'm like, yes, but it's not enough. It's not enough. So I, of course, don't know what the answer to that is. The internet steps in so many ways, but it's so different. The whole discoverability is different. You have to be more deliberate about it. You have to search for these sites. You have to know about these sites. It doesn't just arrive with everything else that newspapers deliver. So I feel in an odd way, when I first started working at Booklist, that some people were, just sort of dismissive. Oh, those reviews, they're so short, and it's too much. It's not very literary. And then, as Twitter took over and even Facebook, our short 200-word reviews became like perfect. So it was very funny to watch that happen. And our quick, our rapid turnarounds too. So I feel like, in an interesting way, the shorter reviews are super, super helpful. And I know that for too many books, the advanced reviews are the only reviews they're getting. And so, we license our reviews to different platforms, and I see them quoted all over, which is great. And it makes me all the more anxious to cover as many books as we can, especially newer authors. So that is really part of our mission. I also really excited that Booklist, in the midst of the pandemic, we have created a second magazine with no additional staff or any real funding. But anyway, it's called Booklist Reader, and it's aimed towards readers, and it's digital at this point. Booklist is a subscription-only platform, although we make a lot of things public. We make a lot of our review of the day is public, and certain aspects. I wish it could all be free, but we do, even though we're not for profit, the ALA depends on us to help support other aspects of the organization. So Booklist Reader, we're in our third issue now, working on the 4th issue. And there's original content in there, but we're also sort of repackaging a lot of our material. And because it's digital, we're linking to all our reviews. So we have a lot of our lists and our trend alerts and things like that. The feedback has been tremendous. There's a huge hunger out there for book reviews. And so I'm very excited that we can do this, and libraries are sharing it online on their websites or in their electronic newsletters. So I feel that we're in a really a time when we're able to share our reviews in new and really exciting ways. And the feedback's been great. Book clubs book groups are always looking for titles, and they comb reviews. And so, and because we have reviewers from all across the country and elsewhere, I feel like we really are offering a good diversity in a lot of ways, as Laurie was saying. Every possible idea for diversity is going on. And And, you know, emphasizing certain subjects or certain types of fiction and poetry. I mean, I have poetry features in there, which, you know, I'm always so happy to have a chance to get people to overcome their fear of poetry. So I'm very excited about that. And we just sort of just did it against many odds. And I'm hoping that it'll continue. And we have a lot of plans for that. So it's free to everyone now, I will say, if you want to take a look at it, because it's just a kind of stripped down way of sharing stuff. And I think that's really important. So.
Well, that's wonderful news. I'm really glad to hear that there are these different platforms for spreading around the work that you guys do. I'm so aware. I mean, I feel like there is a certain amount of energy in the nation around hard news, around, you know, there's philanthropy and there's kind of activism around trying to preserve, you know, it's an uphill battle trying to preserve local news. And I just really hope that culture and ideas can remain a part of that. I think that people need they need news about theater, they need news about painting, they need news about music, and they need news about books in their communities. We've seen with, you know, when you listen to Frances Haugen testifying before Congress, that the big tech mechanisms all move toward the mass, and they're having this effect of they're inflating the impact of bestsellers and deflating the visibility of smaller things. So in all of these things, like in independent book selling, where they, you know, where people are putting out books by smaller presses or bringing to light books by lesser known writers, and in book reviewing and in the work of librarians, this is kind of individual people in, you know, in communities talking to people, pressing back against this kind of homogenization, which I think is really the crucial thing to keep doing, because that's where ideas are, is in the individual, and not in the thing that appeals to thousands and thousands of people. So maybe we should take some questions. Donna, you're in charge.
Yes. Oh, there's so many. Some of these are just, you know, really like thanking us for things. But here, this is from Elizabeth Hall. And what do you make of book criticism / culture on Substack? Could Substack be a place for book critics who can't get full-time media jobs to write substantive criticism and find readership?
My question about Substack is that it definitely works really well if you're already famous. It's quite difficult to have it be, I don't think you can really quite make a living. A few people have managed to move from being unknown to kind of managing on Substack. I think it's a great place if you're working on your own to try out ideas. You can get things to your friends, to your community, and work with an audience. It's a wonderful platform in its simplicity, and it's beautifully designed and stuff. The challenge, though, is I think if we have everybody working in isolation, people do lack a lot of the supports that you get from being a part of an organization. And I love the Substack idea, and I love the idea of writers being able to directly profit from their work. But I think if we just throw everyone to the wolves like this and not preserve the institutions that can provide health insurance and an audience, it's not going to. I'm not sure it can be the whole picture in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you. Here's from Caitlin. With the rise of AI recommendations and an influx of digital spaces for readers to review books they've read, Goodreads, social media, etc., what is the enduring value of book reviews from critics? And as mentioned, these little constellations of similar books and recommendations. So I guess the question is, you know, the citizen reviews, as we called them when this first started, versus reviews from critics. What would the value be of the latter?
Well, I would say that, you know, these reviews by ordinary folks who read books and want to make their opinion known, there's value there. Obviously, it's a discussion, and I think anytime there's a public discussion about books, that is just a good thing. But you also don't know who these people are. whether or not they're getting paid to say these things, whether or not they have a personal vendetta, whether or not they, know anything about books. I mean, there's opinion and then there's criticism, and that's the difference. Excuse me. What I tell critics that I work with is that their opinion is irrelevant. It's their critical assessment. And hopefully, like I said earlier, I have had positive reviews from critics of books that they did not really enjoy reading, but they recognized the genius or the value or, the incredible skill that went into creating this world. So I would hope that readers would understand that there is a difference between somebody who just feels it from the heart, oh, I hated this book because everybody died, or, an emotional reaction, to somebody who can really kind of get inside the book and tell you this is what the author was doing, and, this is how well they succeeded. It's kind of like the difference between having a book club that is, a bunch of people drinking wine and chatting, and a book club where there is a moderator who, really wants to lead the discussion. So I mean, they're both valuable, but I would hope that people wouldn't equate them.
Yes, and I would add to that the whole editorial level. I mean, we, at Booklist and newspapers where I've written, things are vetted. I mean, they're fact-checked, they're edited carefully. There's, a lot of responsibility and ethics go into it. It's not just opinion, as you were saying. I mean, it's a responsible evaluation, and you're not doing it by yourself. You're working with someone who's overseeing it. So that's what, that's the professional side of it. And I think it's very important. And, it's the difference too is that you are reviewing from a perspective of looking at the book. So it's not first person. We don't ever write in the first person, and it's not your opinion works in there, but often your opinion evolves as you're writing a review and really analyzing what it is you've read. So it's a different commitment. And I think there's a good synergy between them, and it's interesting. And I like to, look at those kind of participations on books. And I often search on those sites if I'm looking for, books that connect. But it's a very different endeavor. And I think there's a lot to be said for the work of editing, which is not all that well understood.
This is such a rich question. We all want a bite of it. It's kind of a big question. I have just two other things to add. I completely agree with what both Laurie and Donna said about it. But I also think that by now we have to have a skepticism about the algorithmic input on those systems. Mm-hmm. So they are lifting up what's the most unanimous, or what's getting the most, many of them are lifting up what's the most unanimous or getting the most engagement or whatever. And we've learned that those processes are distortive and sometimes quite harmful. That like you get more algorithmic engagement by being controversial, or by espousing conspiracy theories, or things elevate into we're not seeing a kind of level field of everyone's opinions. It's all kind of being massaged by a machine as opposed to by a person. And I'm also remembering that once when I was I taught writing book reviews to college students, and once I found that they actually, at that moment, and they're young, they're not like reading newspapers yet in their normal lives. They were not really able to articulate the difference between a person's opinion posted on a website and a book review that was attached to an organization that was staking its reputation on it. And I felt that there was a connection there to this distrust of institutions and organized authority. And I feel like that's been harmful for us as a country. We need to start to talk about, like, just because something's in the New York Times doesn't mean it's controlled by a corporate monster. There are good things about being in the New York Times, and there are suspicious things about a person who could have been hired by their nephew to post a good review of something.
Yes, exactly. Being an expert is not a bad thing. let's see. Lots of really nice comments. A question, if a reviewer, this is from Sarah, if a reviewer is particularly keen to look at a certain title, do you take that into consideration when making your selections for what will make the cut for your respective publications? A short answer to that is I really appreciate when reviewers request books from me, because I love to know what they're interested in. It doesn't always work out, but I do welcome that participation. It doesn't affect whether I've selected the book or not, but it may select who I assign it to. I really appreciate reviewers and critics who pay attention, who are out there looking. There's so many, there's those NetGalley and Edelweiss, these online digital galley sites, which a lot of people peruse. The more eyes out there on forthcoming books, the better for me. So I'm always happy to hear from reviewers who have requests. I often have to say no for one reason or another, but it's just it's useful intel, and I do encourage it.
I would agree with that. If it's a critic who I've never worked with before and they pitch a certain book, I'm always a little bit suspicious. Why this book, and do you know the writer? And I mean, you would be surprised how many people will query me and it turns out the book was written by their best friend, or their college professor, or somebody they know, and it just like never occurred to them that this might not be a great thing. So but yeah, it's useful information. With critics that I've worked with over time, I don't have those suspicions. And I am always glad when they pitch books, because sometimes it's a book that wasn't on my radar, or a book that I'd looked at and sort of dismissed, and then but this critic is genius, and I should think about this again. So with critics that I work with on a regular basis, yes, I very well might assign the book to them. And I do encourage them to pitch me, and they don't have to do a whole pitch letter. They just have to give me titles, really, because we've worked together so long. They know what I'm looking for. I know what they like. It's real shorthand. But if it's somebody I don't know, it's good to know what they're interested in, but they're not going to get to review that book.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Do we have time for more, or are we run out of time, Ann?
Elena, what do you think?
Let's do one more.
One
Okay.
more.
Ooh, all right. What should I ask? Well, I guess, this will be interesting. This is for Laurie. What do you think accounts for the continued flourishing of the book section in your paper?
Oh, it's just the perfect confluence, honestly. The newspaper is owned by a private individual. It's not owned by a chain, so we don't have to send our profits away. We are owned by Glenn Taylor, the Minnesota businessman who owns the Minnesota Timberwolves and made a fortune in stationery, I think, or something.
Oh.
You'd never make a fortune in today. But when he bought us, he said he would not put any money into us and he would not take any money out of us. And so we are a self-sustaining newspaper. So that helps immensely. The other thing is, of course, that the Twin Cities, Minnesota, a very literary place. We have 50 bookstores. We have
Oh my God.
really vibrant library system. There are author programs, oh my gosh, there's dozens of them. The University of Minnesota has an MFA program. Hamlin has an MFA program. Augsburg has an MFA program. So there's a lot of writers around. And then, Louise Erdrich lives here, and Dennis Smith lives here. And we just have a huge population of writers as well. And then the Loft Literary Center and the Gray Wolf Press. It's just a really literary place, and it would be crazy to not have, dedicated space in the paper every week for book coverage, because this is what we're all about. And it's sad that not every city in America, has that, but, it's like what Ann was saying earlier, but every place has writers, every place has artists, I'm lucky in that it's just such a huge critical mass that it cannot be ignored. But boy, I really wish that other newspapers could do something similar. I think it's so important, and I just feel like I am so lucky.
Yeah, so I hope Chicago gets its act. We used to have so much more, and there's tons of MFA programs and writers programs. We have the American Writers Museum here, and we have Seminary Co-op and so much else. So yeah, we really just need to keep asking and keep participating. So
I just want, before we sign off, I want you guys to tell people how they can, if they, now that they're stirred up, how they can read your work, how they can read your own writing and the reviews that you edit and publish. So your subscription, right, book list.
yes, you can go to booklistonline.com and find a certain amount of things are public. And, you know, if you just do a search for my name too, there's just lots of stuff out there. I've done lots of things. And, you know, then there's my book. So thank you for that, Ann.
And Donna, so are you for subscribers to the Star Tribune?
Oh, yes. We're at startribune.com/books. You do have to subscribe. I think that you're allowed a certain number of clicks every month. So if you spent them all on book reviews, that would be a really good way to spend them. So, but yeah, we do have a paywall. But you know, I'm on Twitter, Strip Books. I'm on Facebook, Star Tribune Books. I post as much as I can on social media, and sometimes you can get at them that way as well. So,
and your column, is that
yeah,
open, or
it's on our books page. It's called The Bookmark. It runs every Sunday, although sometimes I freelance out the column when I get really super busy. So it's not always by me. And I run Catherine Power's audiobooks column out of the Washington Post once a month. So I don't write the column myself every single week, but it's on the books page. And again, that would be at startribune.com/books.
Well, people should subscribe.
Yes,
yes.
Absolutely.
And at Book Post USA, you can subscribe to get my book reviews, or there's a free option where you get reflections by writers and my comments on the biz. So thank you all so much for coming. This has been, just fascinated. I could talk to these two for all day. And I really
Such a great audience too.
Great questions.
Great questions. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
thank you, Seminary Co-op.
Yeah, thank you all. It's just been a pleasure to be able to host you here tonight. Thank you for the fantastic discussion, the recommendations, and for further information about how to access the brilliant reviews you are writing and editing. So we hope to see you soon in our stores in Chicago, or at least virtually at another event. You can view our full events lineup at semcoop.com/event. It's singular event. So thanks and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.